1 year to the day after their whirlwind marriage, Ethan finally slid the signed divorce papers across the table at the sleek downtown bistro. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice raspy. "Clara, I know you don't love me. I'm letting you go." The woman across from him remained as she always was, impossibly poised, her expression unreadable, her silence a wall of glass. From a corner table, Leo Vance, who had been relentlessly pursuing Clara for years, flashed a triumphant smirk. He sauntered over, his voice dripping with condescension as he addressed Ethan. "Some people need to learn they're out of their league." Glad to see Clara finally came to her senses. But in the next instant, Clara shot to her feet. Under the stunned gazes of everyone in the restaurant, she snatched the papers from the table and, right in front of Leo, ripped them to shreds. She whipped her head around to face Ethan, her composure shattering for the first time since he'd known her. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her voice a raw, trembling whisper laced with a pain he'd never heard before. "No, you don't get to leave." The first hint of dawn barely pierced the heavy blackout curtains, casting the bedroom in a palette of grays. Ethan opened his eyes. The space beside him on the king-size bed was already cold, the sheet retaining only the faint, perfect indentation of where she had slept. The clean, crisp scent of her perfume, like a pine forest after a fresh snow, lingered in the air. But Clara herself was gone, as silent and ephemeral as a ghost. He sat up, the cool wood of the floorboards chilling the soles of his bare feet as he padded into the kitchen. He moved on autopilot, opening the stainless steel fridge for milk and eggs. The butter sizzled in the pan, and the toaster dinged, popping up 2 perfectly golden brown slices of sourdough. It was his daily ritual. It was the only time in this marriage he felt like he had a purpose. Clara emerged from the walk-in closet, already dressed in an impeccably tailored power suit. Her long dark hair pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon that exposed the smooth column of her neck and her cool, distant features. She took her seat at the dining table and began eating the sandwich he'd made, taking small, precise bites. Her focus was absolute, her long lashes casting shadows on her cheeks, betraying nothing. No good morning, no conversation. The only sound in the cavernous apartment was the soft clink of silverware on ceramic, a noise so sharp in the silence it felt like an accusation. Ethan watched her, a dozen pointless pleasantries dying on his lips. "The weather's nice today. Don't work too hard." But the icy fortress of her presence froze the words in his throat. In the end, he just looked down, silently nursing his now lukewarm coffee. After she finished, Clara dabbed her lips with a napkin, a gesture as graceful and practiced as a ballet movement. She stood, picked up her designer handbag from the sofa, and walked to the door without a word. Ethan's heart sank with each receding footstep. The soft click of the front door closing was like a pressure valve releasing. His shoulders slumped, and he sagged into his chair, the weight of their suffocating silence crushing him. This marriage, he thought, was well and truly over. A week later, Ethan was sick. A nasty flu had laid him out, leaving him feverish and aching, too weak to even get out of bed. He fumbled for his phone to call in sick to work, but it slipped from his grasp and clattered to the floor. Through a haze of fever, he sensed someone enter the room. He managed to crack open an eyelid and saw a man in a white coat, a private doctor, taking his temperature. And Clara was there, standing a few feet away by the window, her back to him. Her silhouette was ramrod straight against the light, like a lone cypress tree bracing against a storm. The backlighting blurred her edges, making her seem even more remote. 103. "He needs an 4 drip immediately," the doctor said, his tone professional and detached. Ethan couldn't see the way Clara's hands, hidden in the shadows of the curtains, were clenched into fists, her nails digging so deeply into her palms that the sharp pain was the only thing keeping her expression neutral. "Use the best medication you have," she said. Her voice was steady, cool, devoid of any discernible emotion. She never once turned to look at him, discussing his symptoms with the doctor as if she were handling a routine business transaction. Ethan's lips were cracked and dry. He wanted a glass of water. More than that, he wanted a single word of concern from her. Just one word. But even as the doctor set up the 4, packed his bag, and left, she remained rooted to her spot by the window, as cold and unmoving as a marble statue. The chill in his heart was worse than the fever burning through his body. A few days later, it was Clara's birthday. Pushing aside the memory of her coldness, Ethan had spent nearly a month's salary on a delicate platinum necklace he'd once seen her glance at for a fraction too long in a magazine. He left work early and, awkwardly following a YouTube tutorial, arranged rose petals and candles into a giant heart on the living room floor. He held onto a desperate hope that this one gesture might finally, for once, provoke a flicker of genuine emotion. When Clara came home, she paused for only a heartbeat at the sight of the candlelit room. Her face was the same placid mask as always. No surprise, no annoyance, nothing. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs like a death row prisoner awaiting the verdict. He held out the small velvet box. "Happy birthday," he managed to say, his voice tight with nerves. Clara opened it, her gaze falling on the necklace inside. For a split second, the candlelight seemed to catch a glimmer of something in her eyes, a tiny hitch in her breath, but she quickly lowered her gaze, hiding it from him. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "Thank you." The two words were weightless, devoid of any warmth. Without even touching the necklace, she turned on her heel and walked quickly into the bedroom. It felt like an escape. In the living room, the flickering candles stretched Ethan's shadow long and lonely across the floor. He didn't know that the moment the door closed, Clara had slumped against it, sliding to the floor. He didn't know she was clutching the little box to her chest, as if it were a lifeline, silent tears streaming down her face. The final straw came during his company's corporate retreat at a lakeside resort in Michigan. As a spouse, Clara had attended. When she walked into the resort's main dining hall, wearing a simple cream-colored dress, a hush fell over the room. She was ethereal, otherworldly, her beauty so striking it felt almost unreal. Ethan's colleagues shot him looks of awe and envy, muttering about how lucky he was. A small, pathetic flicker of pride warmed his chest. He took Clara's hand, the feel of her cool skin and his surreal sensation. That flicker of pride was quickly extinguished by crushing humiliation. During dinner, his department head came over, glass of whiskey in hand, and clapped Ethan on the back. "My man, you really outkicked your coverage with this one," he boomed at Clara. "To get a girl like you, Ethan must have saved a bus full of orphans in a past life." Clara offered a barely perceptible nod, not even gracing him with a polite smile. The air at the table instantly froze. "She's a little shy," Ethan stammered, forcing a laugh. "Doesn't talk much. Don't mind her." After that, no matter who tried to make conversation, Clara's response was the same. A clipped, one-word answer or a silent nod, her expression unchanging. Soon, no one bothered trying. Ethan could feel the gazes of his co-workers shifting from envy to pity, and then to something bordering on second-hand embarrassment. He felt like a fraud, a clown desperately trying to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage. And then, an unwelcome guest appeared, pushing his mortification to its peak. Leo Vance, dressed in a ridiculously expensive-looking white linen suit. He strolled to their table with a glass of red wine, acting as if he owned the place. "Clara, darling, what are you doing here?" he asked, his tone oozing a familiarity that made Ethan's blood run cold. The endearment, so casually thrown out, felt like a hot needle in his ear. Clara's brow furrowed almost invisibly, and she instinctively shifted half an inch closer to Ethan. Leo pretended not to notice. His eyes landed on Ethan, a smug, dismissive smile playing on his lips. "Mr. Cole, it must be a lot of work keeping up with her." He leaned in conspiratorially, his voice a stage whisper of feigned sympathy. "Clara's a special case. Not everyone can handle her, but we grew up together. I know what she's thinking with just one look." The words were a public declaration of war. The color drained from Ethan's face. Around them, his colleagues leaned in, smelling gossip. Under the table, Ethan's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. Leo's performance wasn't over. His gaze flickered to the platinum necklace around Clara's neck, the one Ethan had given her, and he let out a barely audible scoff. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, he raised his voice. "Oh, by the way, darling, that Patek Philippe Celestial I got for you. How come I never see you wear it? Don't you like it?" He then gestured to the pair of diamond studs in Clara's ears. "Then again, these earrings suit you much better. I knew it when I won them at that auction in Geneva. I just knew they'd look perfect on you." Ethan recognized those earrings. When Clara had brought them home, she told him they were a freebie from a Neiman Marcus promotion. To everyone else at the table, Leo's words were an unmistakable assertion of dominance, a display of his immense wealth and his intimate, exclusive relationship with Clara. A collective gasp went around the table, followed by a flurry of whispers. Now, the looks his colleagues gave him were just pure, unadulterated pity. Ethan's eyes fell to the glittering studs in her ears, then back to the simple platinum chain he'd bought her, which suddenly looked dull and cheap under the restaurant lights. A tidal wave of humiliation washed over him, cold, and absolute. He had scrimped and saved, thinking he was giving her the best he could offer. To men like Leo Vance, it was a joke. He looked at Clara, praying with every fiber of his being that she would say something, anything, just a single word of denial. But she just sat there, her gaze fixed on her lap, her long lashes trembling slightly. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. To Ethan, her silence was a confession, a verdict. In that moment, the last ember of hope in his heart was doused. He wasn't her husband. He was the third wheel, the awkward interloper in their world. His marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a joke, and he was the punchline. He had lost, utterly and completely. The moment the car door shut, Clara gasped for air. The small, enclosed space, finally free of Ethan's co-workers and Leo, was a vacuum of silence. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. That dinner had been a public execution. She had only agreed to go because she'd seen a flicker of hope in Ethan's eyes when he'd asked her. She wanted to be a part of his world. She wanted to be the woman he could proudly introduce as my wife. But when Leo appeared, when he'd turned the diamond earrings, a gift she'd been too flustered and ashamed to properly refuse, into a weapon against Ethan, she saw it. She saw the blood drain from Ethan's face. She saw the last light in his eyes die. Her throat had closed up, an invisible hand squeezing the air from her lungs. Her social anxiety, amplified by the searing shame and rage, had paralyzed her. It wasn't a confession. She was trapped. Her clumsy, silent love had become the knife that twisted deepest in his heart. On their anniversary, Ethan had asked to meet at the bistro where they'd had their first date. Clara arrived half an hour early. In a rare departure from her severe work attire, she wore the same cream-colored dress he'd once said he liked. She'd even put on a touch of makeup, hoping he might see a different side of her. She sat by the window, mentally rehearsing the words. "Happy anniversary. I love the necklace you gave me." But she wasn't just waiting for Ethan. A few tables away sat the ever-present shadow of Leo Vance. He was on his phone, his voice deliberately loud. "Yeah, some guys just don't get it. You think a marriage certificate is enough to tie down a woman like Clara, the world she comes from? It's a different league. What's a middle-class guy like him supposed to offer? It's only a matter of time before he gets kicked to the curb." Every word was a poisoned dart, lodging deep in her soul. She looked up just as Ethan walked in, and their eyes met. He had heard. She saw the last trace of color vanish from his face. He walked to the table and sat down without looking at her. The soft strains of violin filled the air, a mocking soundtrack to their dissolution. Ethan took a deep breath, pulled a folder from his briefcase, and pushed it toward her. "Divorce agreement. Clara, I know you don't love me," he said, his voice raw, his eyes terrifyingly red. "I'm letting you go." Clara's mind went blank, a deafening roar filling her ears. She stared at the signature on the page. Ethan Cole. The ink pressed so hard it nearly tore through the paper. From the corner, Leo hung up his phone and approached their table, his face a mask of undisguised victory. He looked down his nose at Ethan. "A guy like you was never in her league." Glad she finally figured it out. That was the line. It was the key that finally broke the lock on Clara's cage. No, it didn't break the lock. It obliterated it. In the next second, Clara shot to her feet. The chair screeched backward, its legs dragging against the floor in a single, piercing shriek that silenced the entire restaurant. Under everyone's shocked gaze, she snatched the divorce agreement. Then, right in front of Leo's dumbfounded face, she ripped it viciously to pieces. The shreds of paper fluttered down like bitter snow. She turned to Ethan, her red-rimmed eyes locked on his, her composure completely gone. Her voice was a ragged, trembling mess of disbelief, pain, and a panic she didn't even know she was capable of feeling. "No, you don't get to leave." She reached out, her trembling fingers closing around his cold wrist. As Leo stared in disbelief and a wave of gasps rippled through the room, she summoned every ounce of strength she possessed and made her declaration. "Ethan Cole is my husband." She took a ragged breath, as if it was the bravest thing she had ever done. "I love him." And before anyone could react, she leaned in on her toes and clumsily, desperately, covered his slightly parted, stunned lips with her own. It was a messy, frantic, and utterly, devastatingly real kiss. The world, in that moment, stopped turning. The world, as Ethan knew it, shattered, and then reassembled itself into something entirely new. The noise of the restaurant, Leo's face twisting in rage, the gasps of the other diners. It all faded into a blurry, out-of-focus background. The only thing that was real was the soft, cool press of her lips against his, trembling with a desperate, absolute resolve. Her scent, that familiar fragrance of pine and winter, was suddenly overwhelming, mingling with her panicked, heated breath, wrapping around him like a shroud. His mind was a white void. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat roaring in his ears. The kiss was as awkward as an accident, and as resolute as an oath. She pulled back just as quickly, like a startled deer. A deep blush, a color he had never seen on her, spread across her cheeks and down to the tips of her ears. Her eyes, usually so crystalline and cool, were now shimmering with unshed tears. She couldn't meet his gaze, but she still clung to his wrist, her grip ironclad, as if he were the only solid thing in a raging storm. "Go," she breathed, the word barely a sound. Then, pulling a still-reeling Ethan behind her, she all but fled the restaurant, leaving a trail of chaos, shredded paper, and the faint, echoing sound of Leo's enraged shouting and a glass shattering against a wall. Back at the apartment, the door slammed shut, sealing them off from the world. The living room was dark, save for the cool moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting two long, silent shadows on the floor. Ethan could finally breathe again. He looked at the woman beside him, her head bowed, her body rigid, her fingertips still trembling. The phantom warmth of her kiss still burned on his lips. 1,000 questions boiled inside him. Why? I thought you didn't love me. Did you mean it? But seeing her now, so fragile, she looked as if a single touch might break her. He couldn't force a single word out. Clara didn't look at him. It was as if she'd used a lifetime's worth of courage at the restaurant, and had now retreated back into her impenetrable shell. She pulled her hand from his and stumbled to the couch, sinking into the cushions and burying her face in her arms, a posture of pure self-preservation. The silence returned, heavier and more suffocating than ever before. Just as Ethan resigned himself to another night of unspoken torment, a small light glowed in the darkness. It was the screen of Clara's phone. Her head was still buried, but she stubbornly held the phone out in his direction. The screen was open to her notes app. A blinking cursor pulsed like her own anxious heartbeat. Then, one letter at a time, a sentence haltingly appeared. "I'm sorry." Ethan's heart plunged. Before he could process it, she had deleted the words. The cursor blinked again. "I love you so much." Ethan's pupils dilated in the darkness. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, his eyes locked on the glowing screen. She seemed to feel his presence, and her fingers flew faster, more erratically across the keyboard. "That day you were sick, I called the doctor. I stood by the window not because I was cold, but because I was terrified. I don't know how to comfort people. I was afraid I'd say the wrong thing and make you feel worse." A sharp pain lanced through Ethan's chest. Her rigid back. It wasn't aloofness. It was anxiety. New words appeared. "The necklace you gave me. I love it. I love it more than anything. I was afraid you'd see, so I wear it every day, hidden under my clothes. I was afraid if you knew how happy it made me, you'd think I was too easy to please." "You idiot," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. He raised a hand to touch her, then let it fall, afraid to break the spell. "Those earrings from Leo. I refused them so many times, but he sent them to my office where everyone could see. I didn't know what to do. I was scared you'd misunderstand, but even more scared, you'd think I was too weak to even say no, that you'd lose respect for me. That night at the retreat, when I saw how hurt you were, it felt like my chest was filled with cement. I couldn't get a single word out. I wasn't agreeing with him. I couldn't speak." The last line typed. The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers and fell silently onto the plush rug, the screen going dark. Every mystery, every doubt was solved in an instant. What he had perceived as coldness, as indifference, as the final proof of his humiliation. It was all just the clumsy, desperate armor of a deep and terrifying love. Ethan reached out and gently, tentatively, pulled her hands away from her face. Her tear-streaked face was revealed, completely defenseless. She was crying silently, but the tears fell in a relentless, heartbreaking stream. Her eyes were red and swollen, filled with a raw, helpless fear, like a child awaiting punishment. In that instant, the powerful heiress, the Ice Queen, vanished. All he saw was a girl who loved him with everything she had, but was too broken to know how to show it. A girl who had cornered herself in a prison of silence. Ethan's heart seized, the pain so intense it stole his breath. He reached out, his callous thumb wiping away her tears. "You idiot," he whispered again. He scooped her up from the couch, pulling her into his arms and holding her with all his strength. "You're the biggest idiot in the world." The woman in his arms went rigid for a second, then seemed to collapse against him, letting out the small, wounded, choked sob she had held back for so long. So that's how it was. Ethan closed his eyes, burying his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in a scent that he once thought was a sign of distance, but now recognized as the purest comfort. All this time, you were loving me as hard as you could. And he thought, almost threw it all away. A crisis always arrives at the moment of greatest happiness. The next afternoon, the atmosphere in Ethan's project team meeting was funereal. It's over. We're finished. The department head burst through the door, his face as white as a sheet. He was clutching a fax as if it were a death warrant. Starlight Capital just sent notice. They're pulling all funding, effective immediately. He paused, his eyes wild. Not only that, they've partnered with every other VC in the city to freeze all our lines of credit. The room fell into a dead silence, followed by groans of despair. This project was the company's lifeline. It was the project Ethan had poured countless sleepless nights into. One of his colleagues slammed a fist on the table. Why? Who the hell did we piss off? The department head's gaze swept across the room like a vulture's, finally landing, with venomous intent, on Ethan. Him, he shrieked, slamming the fax down in front of Ethan. Starlight Capital is backed by the Vance family. The notice specifically names you, Ethan. You pissed off Leo Vance. Every head in the room swiveled. Every eye fixed on Ethan, filled with a mixture of shock, accusation, and contempt. So it was you. You pick a fight with a billionaire's son and drag the whole company down with you. Get out. You're fired. The weight of their scorn was a physical blow. The blood drained from Ethan's face as he looked at the men who had been his teammates yesterday and were now a lynch mob. He knew this was Leo's revenge. It was cruel, precise, and aimed directly at his pride. He was going to destroy Ethan's career, grind his dignity into the dirt, and then kick him out of Clara's life like a piece of trash. Just then his phone rang. It was Clara. He looked at her name on the screen, took a deep breath to steady his trembling hands, and walked to a corner to answer. Hey, Clara. He forced his voice to sound normal, gentle. Her voice, cool and steady on the other end, was an anchor in his swirling panic. Are you done with work? I'm downstairs. Ethan's heart lurched. He peered through the blinds of the conference room window. Down on the street, parked next to her familiar white sedan, stood Clara. She was wearing a simple cream-colored dress, looking like an elegant, solitary statue. She seemed to be waiting for him, just like any other day. But Ethan saw something new. Her eyes, usually so clear and calm, were fixed on the entrance of his office building. And in them, he saw a cold, sharp edge he had never seen before. She knew. Before he could speak, the department head's phone let out a shrill ring. He answered it with a snarl. What do you want? The next second, he froze as if struck by lightning. His back, which had been puffed up with self-importance, began to curve into a subservient bow. His face morphed from rage to fawning terror. Mr. Pierce. Yes, sir. Hello. It's an honor, sir. Yes, we were fools, sir. We offended someone we never should have. We're so sorry. So sorry. What? You're going to increase the investment by a factor of 10, and you're acquiring Vance Industries. As an apology gift to Mrs. Cole. The department head's eyes nearly bulged out of his skull. He held the phone, his hand shaking, and turned to stare at Ethan as if he were looking at a god. Mrs. Cole? The conference room became so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Everyone stared, slack-jawed, from Ethan to the slender figure standing on the pavement below. Ethan's mind went completely blank. He held his own phone to his ear, listening to Clara's voice, still calm, but now infused with a soothing reassurance he had never noticed before. Ethan, don't be afraid, she said softly. From now on, no one gets to bully you. Anyone who touches you, I'll make them disappear. The collapse of Vance Industries was less of a business failure and more of a surgical strike followed by controlled demolition. One day, it was the darling of the market. The next, its stock was in a free fall, the ticker a solid wall of red. Partners pulled out, creditors called in their loans, and the bank's collection calls became the soundtrack to Leo Vance's personal hell. On the financial news networks, pundits offered a dozen complex theories for the company's spectacular implosion, but none of them guessed the truth. This wasn't competition. It was extermination, executed from a higher plane of power where cost was no object. But at the epicenter of the storm, everything was warm. Soft light filled the apartment kitchen. Ethan was chopping vegetables, the rhythmic thud of the knife a steady, peaceful beat. His expression was focused, the lines of his face gentle in the warm glow. Clara stood beside him, perfectly still. She wasn't trying to help. She was just watching him, her cool gray eyes reflecting his image as if he were the only thing in her world. The ice that once chilled the air between them had melted into a silent, steady current of warmth. This place finally felt like a home. Ding dong, ding dong. The doorbell rang, frantic and insistent, like a dying animal throwing itself against the door. The peaceful atmosphere shattered. Ethan wiped his hands on a towel and went to answer it. The man standing in the hallway made the warmth in the room instantly evaporate. Leo Vance. His expensive, custom-tailored suit was a mess of wrinkles. His tie was askew, his hair a disheveled wreck. He smelled of stale cigarettes, old liquor, and pure desperation. He was no longer the arrogant prince of the city. He was a stray dog with a broken back. When he saw Ethan, Leo's bloodshot eyes widened, and he forced a smile that looked more painful than a grimace. Mr. Cole, he rasped, his voice raw with fear. Ethan said nothing. He simply looked at Leo, his expression devoid of anger, of mockery, of anything at all. It was the detached indifference of a man looking at an insect. That look was more suffocating to Leo than any insult. He knew, in that moment, that he no longer even qualified as a rival worthy of Ethan's anger. Clara emerged from the kitchen. She was still in her soft loungewear, her face free of makeup. In her hand, she held a small, sharp paring knife she'd been using to peel an apple, turning it over and over in her fingers. She glanced at Leo. Just one look. Thump. Leo's legs gave out. He felt his knees on the hard tile of the entryway. The sudden movement made Ethan's brow furrow, not with pity, but with disgust. Clara. Mr. Cole. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Leo abandoned the last of his dignity, crawling forward on his knees, banging his forehead against the floor. I'm not human. I'm an animal. I was jealous. I shouldn't have said those things. He looked up, his face a pathetic mess of tears and snot. I was an idiot. I thought if I could just get rid of Mr. Cole, you might finally look at me. He started slapping his own face, the sharp sounds echoing in the silent apartment. Please, I'm begging you, let my family go. My father, he's in the ICU from stress. If you just spare us, I swear, I'll leave the city. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again for the rest of your life, he wailed, performing the role of a desperate man with gut-wrenching conviction. Ethan remained silent. He walked to the hall closet, took out a cleaning rag, and knelt. Leo's eyes lit up with a flash of hope, thinking Ethan was about to help him up. Instead, Ethan expressionlessly wiped the spot on the floor where Leo had been kneeling. You're getting my floor dirty, he said softly. The quiet words hit Leo like a physical blow. His sobs died in his throat, and his face went ashen. It was the ultimate humiliation. He wasn't even worthy of dirtying the floor in this home. Just then, Clara finally spoke. Her voice was as cool and clean as fresh snow. Fine. Leo's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. The paring knife in Clara's hand stopped spinning, its sharp tip catching the light. She looked at him, her words precise and cutting. I can let your father's company survive. A wave of delirious joy washed over Leo. He was saved. His family was saved. Thank you. Thank you, Miss Pierce. Thank you, Mr. Cole, he babbled, knocking his head on the floor again. Clara ignored him, but she continued in that same frigid tone. There's one condition. Starting tomorrow, 51% of Vance Industries shares will be transferred to my husband's name. Free of charge. Leo froze. The company is now my husband's toy, Clara stated. If he's in a good mood, he can let it run. If he's in a bad mood, a cold, thin smile touched her lips. He can crush it whenever he feels like it. As for you, she said, her icy gaze dissecting him, get out. And remember, your family, your father's life. It's all in my husband's hands now. Their survival depends entirely on his happiness. Leo collapsed into a boneless heap, shaking uncontrollably as a cold sweat soaked through his clothes. This wasn't forgiveness. It was a life sentence. She had turned his entire family legacy into a plaything for the man he had tried to destroy. Do you understand? Clara asked, a hint of impatience in her voice. Yes, I understand. I understand. Leo scrambled to his feet and practically fell out the door, fleeing as if a demon were on his heels. Only when the elevator door slid shut did he collapse against the cool metal wall, his face a mask not of relief, but of absolute, unending terror. Back in the apartment, Ethan closed the door and tossed the dirty rag into the trash. He turned to look at Clara. She had put the knife down and was walking toward him. She reached out and took his hand, her palm warm and steady. Are you unhappy that I let him off so easy? She asked, tilting her head up to look at him, her eyes searching his. Final chapter. Ethan smiled. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close and resting his chin on the top of her head. "No," he said, his voice soft, but with an undercurrent of cold satisfaction. "Letting him live is far more interesting than letting him die." Clara relaxed against him, nuzzling into his chest. Then, in a voice only he could hear, she whispered, "I had my lawyers draft the transfer agreement. You can start as chairman tomorrow. Leo tried to take your job," she added. "Now, you can make him work for you for the rest of his life." The afternoon sun was no longer barred by heavy curtains. It streamed through the spotless floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the living room in a warm, golden light. The air smelled of freshly ground coffee and the buttery sweetness of baking cookies. Ethan was curled on the couch, engrossed in a copy of What to Expect When You're Expecting. He wore a soft, cream-colored sweater, the lines around his eyes relaxed and gentle. The deep-seated insecurity that had once defined him had been completely erased, smoothed over by a profound sense of peace. A light footstep sounded behind him. Clara emerged from the bedroom in a comfortable sundress, her long hair loose and cascading over her shoulders, softening the sharp, elegant lines of her frame. She glowed with a lazy, contented softness, the kind that only comes from being deeply loved. She said nothing, simply walking up behind the couch and leaning down to wrap her arms around his neck. She rested her chin on his shoulder, her cheek pressing against his. It was an easy, natural gesture of profound intimacy. "What are you reading?" she murmured, her voice husky with sleep. Ethan didn't turn around. He just smiled, covering her hands with his own. "Studying," he said, his voice full of a gentle, hopeful excitement. "Learning how to be a good dad." Clara blinked, her gaze falling on the book's cover, which featured a chubby, smiling baby. Her heart swelled with a warmth so powerful it almost hurt. Not long ago, she couldn't even manage a simple word of concern. Now, they were dreaming of a new life, a future that was a fusion of them both. "Ethan," she said softly. He answered. She hugged him tighter, burying her face in the crook of his neck and taking a deep breath of his scent, the scent that had become her home. Then, in a voice that was almost a whisper but perfectly clear, she said, "I love you." The 3 words, once a desperate, world-shattering declaration, now felt as natural as breathing, as warm as the sunlight filling the room. Ethan's smile widened. He turned his head and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead. "I know." He set the book aside and gently pulled her around to sit beside him, gathering her into his arms. He looked out the window at the brilliant afternoon, thinking of the dark mornings, the cold divorce papers, the humiliating night at the resort. The memories that once felt like open wounds were now just scars, faint reminders of the path that had led them here. The misunderstandings had taught them to communicate. The pain had taught them to cherish what they had. The coldness of the past only made the warmth of this embrace feel more profound. He looked down at the woman resting peacefully in his arms. She was his entire world, his salvation. Clara shifted, finding a more comfortable position against his chest, and looked up at him. "Ethan, do you think our baby will be more like you, or more like me?" Her eyes sparkled with the beautiful, brilliant light of their future. Ethan leaned down and captured her lips in a deep, tender kiss. It didn't matter who the baby resembled. All that mattered was that from this day forward, they would be together, spending a lifetime loving and protecting each other. The sun was bright. The breeze was gentle. They had become each other's world, a sky forever filled with light.